Everyone, it's Gordon Einstein. We are back for the third day of Digital Week Online. I was happy to moderate the whole first day. Then I had a day off, and now I'm here to actually moderate a panel with my favorite person and newly favorite people. And the topic is corporate innovation. So I am going to go, of course, in the order that appears on my Zoom screen, which is, I guess, the old-fashioned way of doing it, and ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and give us, there's Richard, and give us the short version of their background, sort of like the Wolverine origin story. So, this is like a Marvel movie, but probably shorter and better. So, Ali, please introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about yourself, your origin story, and then we will go to Nisa. So go ahead, please.
Sure, absolutely. So as mentioned, my name is Ali Madhavji. I'm the managing partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. We invest in and help venture build early stage startups. We also invest in several other funds, including Draper Home, we're an LP, and Loyal VC, where we're also on the investment committee. We work with the United Nations as well on blockchain initiatives and how to help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and also with institutions like INSEAD, which is one of the leading business schools globally.
Yep.
And also serve on a couple of boards of public companies in the blockchain space. Yeah, I mean, we
so you're pretty busy.
Nah, I got lots of time. So, but we are always looking for incredible startups. And so if anyone has any ideas, feel free to let us know. But I mean, I've been in the space for a long time, and now I think 5 years almost as an entrepreneur in the space full time. So, just keeping busy and out there to work with some of the best and brightest.
Fantastic. Nisa.
Very similar story. So people are always asking, well, what are you actually doing in the space? Because, are you a lawyer? Are you a VC? Are you a journalist? Are you a TV anchor? I've done it all.
Right.
But so I've been in venture capital now for 10 years and investing in tech. And prior to that, I was a securities and corporate lawyer, also spent some time in media, which is why I still write for Forbes Crypto and host
very interesting.
of shows, the Digital Asset Report, CoinScrum, etc. But we at A100X is the name of our fund. And we invest in line also with the Sustainable Development Goals in blockchain and AI enabled businesses. And we've seeded companies like Draper Labs, on the board of Wharton Business School and a bunch of other companies. So we are always looking for great startups. And happy to be here this morning.
That's quite the background. Interesting, fantastic. Richard. So sorry, Richard, you joined us a minute late, but we're happy to have you. I'm kind of going through the panelists, asking them to introduce themselves, and also hopefully you'll get this. There's like the Wolverine origin story. Like every Marvel movie every superhero has an origin story. You look like a superhero. So we want to know what you're up to. We also want to know your origin, like how you came to all this. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's good to see you over here today.
Yes.
So I'm Richard, and from Draper Dragon. And Draper Dragon actually is a joint venture from the DFJ and the Dragon Venture in Silicon Valley. And Draper Dragon actually quite focused on China market since it started 2005. So we have been in venture capital area for 16 years already. And we are only focused on early stage investment, only early stage. So since the 16 years experience and history, actually we invest quite widespread area, including semiconductor, AI stuff, healthcare, medical devices, and also internet company.
Mm-hmm.
Also, and then we follow Tim Draper's instruction and his mentoring, and we start to invest the blockchain area since 2015. So since then, in 2015, we invested quite a lot of blockchain projects, both equity and also token. And till today, we still quite focused on this area. And in the past couple of years, we invest quite a lot in public chain company, including some application scenario companies, some project, and also some exchange as well, and including the rating company and the media. So for the past half years, we quite pay quite attention in some DeFi project and also NFT project too. So yeah, also including layer 2. So I guess that's what we are trying to do in not just the past half years and also the coming year, this year.
Very interesting. And then last but definitely not least, my personal friend, Andy.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
man.
Sure. Yes, anytime. Right.
Hey. Hi, everyone. So my name is Andy. I'm in Singapore right now. I'm the advisory board member of Hyundai. Hyundai DAC is a subsidiary of the Hyundai Motors in South Korea. So my journey started in 2016, where I started my own blockchain supply chain company. So I ended my stint in 2019. I started to give advice to governments. So I give advice to about 22 countries, talk to the different ministers. And I also a special advisor to one of the province in South Korea, also trying to tokenize the city and using the blockchain technology. So I'm investor since probably more than 10 years ago. Started in the APP era, and since then I've never stopped. I've also held different appointments in investment companies, public listed companies as well. So great to see everyone.
Andy, fantastic. Published author, I might add. Yes?
Oh, yes, I am.
Fantastic. So along with the topic of investments in innovation, I'll just throw this to the group and see who picks up the ball and runs with it. What are we seeing in this, I don't want to say post-COVID world, but maybe end of the beginning of COVID world? How are the models changing, and how's the focus or foci changing based on the biggest news story of at least a couple years now? And then just feel free to anyone to jump in, or I'll call them some people like it's a class. Nisa, you know, I've seen your expression, so I'm just going to jump to you. So how's your, now I know it works. So how is your, well, you heard the question, how is Corona affecting your investment models over time, and then where do you see it going?
So, I think in the crypto and blockchain industry, we are pretty much all used to working remotely and being decentralized and investing globally. I think the pandemic has accelerated many different things, and we've seen it in, run up in prices, which is obviously what the media focuses on. But if you look at healthcare and supply chain, and you see the problems that have been exposed with the pandemic, whether that be medical devices or supplies or vaccine rollouts or the coordination of clinical trials, or even contact tracing, that was all brought to light. So while we were looking at blockchain as a solution for healthcare even before this started, now that's come to the forefront, and there are many more startups working in that area. And the other area that we're seeing a lot of activity is in startups using the technology for climate change as well, in line with, at least in the US, with the new administration here, very focused on that. So that's exciting, because I think the pandemic is tragic, and we're all living through it, but a lot of what it did was just accelerate behaviors that were already set in motion. And I think people really are open to looking at technology as a way to solve some of these real world problems.
I gotta say, I agree with you. I've commented often that it seems like the future has accelerated, but it's a slightly different future. It's kind of a weird Twilight Zone, almost parallel path. It's definitely recognizable, but I don't think it's where we would have gotten otherwise given enough time, which is what one would might have thought. It's something else that showed up, and that something else showed up early. It's kind of a weird feeling a little bit, and we're still in the middle of the process. So it's hard to get a perspective on it, but I think your comments are well taken. And keeping with the theme that I'm going to pick on people to talk rather than having them raise hands, I guess. Ali, please.
Yeah, no, happy to, Gordon. So, I mean, we're seeing a few different things, and I think one of the parts that we're always looking at is sort of how blockchain pairs with other technologies, right? And so when you look
I gotta jump in 1 second, but I love that way you phrase that because it made me think wine and cheese. So that's good. That's good.
Exactly, though.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
it's in a similar way, right? But that's really where we see synergistic benefits unlocked. So, you know, the pairing of blockchain with AI is becoming more and more common, right? And this is where we see sort of that exponential growth being able to start taking off. And, you know, when we look at applications right now, you know, both within our portfolio and outside of it, where, you know, blockchain is being used for, you know, the music industry and tracking, you know, unreported or misreported plays by streaming services, as an example. Or you look at it being used in, you know, in the education sector, fintech sector, used for, you know, helping banks, financial institutions with lending and reducing risk. I mean, there's so many areas here where it pairs with, you know, other technologies to really unlock growth, and that's where we're seeing huge opportunities.
So I'm gonna obnoxiously jump in, but if you can play on the Corona angle of this, I mean, has any of that changed based on the pandemic? Is it accelerated? Like,
and we've seen
did
it
your focus
accelerate
shift a little?
significantly. So we've actually seen a very, very positive impact to a lot of these digital companies. We've seen, you know, AI, you know, continue to accelerate, as well as blockchain continue to accelerate. Not crypto markets, you know, you can sort of ignore all of that at the moment. But even just from the fact that these are built innately remotely and these teams can work more effectively remotely, these solutions can be deployed remotely. And so when you sort of factor in all of those things, you've seen, you know, a tremendous uptake in these technologies. I mean, the need for sort of more trust as well, and a lack of transparency in solving these problems, it continues to drive a lot of adoption. I think that's why over the last year, we've seen substantially an increase in adoption from corporates using these technologies, willing to sort of dive much more deeper than they have in the previous years with these. And I think crypto markets, you're also seeing something similar with a lot of this, right? I mean, you can look at NFTs even as an example, and what's been happening in that space over the past few months, and the people you've got involved in that space in the last few months. That's not something that typically, you know, we would have seen, I think, a few years ago.
You're, I think, alluding to something I hadn't really thought of, which is prior to the pandemic, even if we never met directly the people we were doing business with, there was at least the theoretical capacity if something was going wrong to get on a plane, go meet them, and, you know, either shake them or talk to them depending on the context. But now that's kind of gone. So the latent ability to reach out and solve something like with a face-to-face conversation has sort of disappeared. So maybe trust has moved from a nice to have to a business requirement that has to be implemented through non-traditional means, and hence this acceleration.
And I think innately that's part of it, right? I think these teams in the blockchain space were also built more remotely from day one, right? Like, it typically wasn't, let's put everyone in one office and have everyone have to come to work every day, whereas a lot of the traditional world is still built like that. And I think they've struggled still in comparison to these innately built teams that are remote.
Well, I guess I'm adding to that, which is even when there was remote teams before, there's always at least a hypothetical possibility they could say, okay, this isn't working. Everyone fly to Chicago. We're going to meet and talk and resolve it. There was always that sort of latent thing, even if you never did it, but everyone kind of on a subconscious level was aware that was possible. Now that's not even possible. So it took away that subconscious crutch. And now you have to make these systems robust, because there's just no way the system is the only system. There's not like a fallback plan anymore. I don't know. I felt like you were kind of alluding to that idea, and I'd never heard that idea consciously articulated before.
No, exactly right, and that's definitely sort of along the lines, and I think a big pioneer, although not necessarily a blockchain company in this in sort of this remote working methodology, was also GitLab, right? And I
Sure.
think they deserve a lot of credit for being the first remote unicorn, in the world. And I think a lot of that ethos, though, it does sort of go through the blockchain and crypto companies.
For sure. Richard, I'm just going in the order on my screen, sort of. So the question is, how is Corona shaded how is it changing your present and your future trajectory of what you invest in and innovation, and what's happened now that's different from what would have happened otherwise, maybe?
Right. Well, actually, we do feel a lot difference because the pandemic that we see quite a lot of retail company or for the consumer company, they encounter very bad business since the pandemic. But for those technology company or say medical sector company, they actually get a quite good variation because they need to provide a cloud service and also the healthcare service. So for those kind of company, they do get some take some advantage from this situation. It's not good to say so, but that's reality. But when we talk about blockchain, we do see that China government, they try to spend more budget to using the blockchain technology to do some service for like a public service, like for say insurance, like say for the medical service as well. So because this, I believe the China government is realized that digitization for everything is getting more and more important, and furthermore, they want to digitize all the data. What I mean digitize all the data means that right now most of the data actually they just something like numbers and they just put on the paper, and those data did not connect it because China is so big, right? All the different tier 1 cities, something like that, all different bureaus. But the government realized that, so they're trying to using some blockchain technology and try to digitize those data and make it more valuable to give more value-added service. In that case, they may be able to create something to overcome the COVID things, because the COVID things actually do damage some business, especially as I mentioned earlier, retail and also the consumer market. But by doing so, to value add those data, they might be able to help those companies. So we do see some local government and also some big enterprise trying to move that way, and we pay quite a lot of attention to see what they can do about it.
Interesting. And you're alluding to something kind of controversial, which is the fact that various sectors and technologies is the fact that they're benefiting from this coronavirus world. Politically incorrect to mention.
Right. I would say because these things, right? Because of pandemic things, so government need to do something better. So they may transfer their focus on something they didn't pay attention before. Okay, it just like to transfer your focus because they got some problem, so they want to fix some other issues. So for example, the preserve privacy. We all know those preserve privacy technology should be able to help the data to keep to have better privacy, to have a better data protection. So they are able to using those data to make something, maybe some new business model. Right. So that's some local government trying to do, and also some big company trying to do.
Yeah, just kind of getting to what Nisa mentioned, we're kind of bantering about, like there's an alternative future that got accelerated. I'm not sure it's a dystopian future. It may just be a different future. I'm not sure that this is worse than what was coming otherwise. Maybe it's even better in some ways. Maybe it's making us take care of things earlier than we would have otherwise, and address things earlier than we would have otherwise. And maybe, given the way the world works, we would never have gotten around to it before, because there's other priorities. But now it kind of forced our hand a bit. So
No, but
I don't know.
guess
Andy, let me
no,
hand it to you.
I guess my view would be slightly different because yes, COVID-19 has indeed accelerated many of our minds and put everything into action. But the real fact is that many of us, including investors, governments, and businesses, are in their comfort zone for the longest time. You know, why would a 5-star hotel, not able to to have a online platform where they can sell their food? You get what I mean? Why would they only roll out such a platform during the COVID-19 period, right? So a lot of this will go back to the fact that a lot of us, including the businesses, including ourselves, are in a very comfort zone where we are very reluctant to change. A lot of this technology that we talk about, whether it's from Nisa, from Richard, and so forth, is not rocket science. You get what I mean? So maybe what I will say is this. I break this down into 3 different parts. Yeah, first part will be from the government. Government has always been trying very hard to make companies adopt new technology, right? They took the chance during this period of time where a lot of us are stuck in wherever we are. They took the chance to introduce us new grants, new free money, for companies. If you adopt maybe a blockchain technology, you adopt an e-commerce technology, which is a joke. They give you a 30 grand, a 50 grand, and so forth, right? So governments are taking that chance to make sure that more adoptions can be seen, on the country or national level. So to promote, a certain technology, to promote a certain innovation. But again, is that real innovation? Is actually not, to be very frank, right? It's just government trying to spoon feed all these SMEs, trying to tell them that, hey, just come on board right now during this period of time, since you can't travel, all your stuff are there. Why not you test out the latest HRM system that is on blockchain, for example? But all these things are not rocket science. The second thing that I would like to.
Well, Andy, let me jump in just because you're my friend and I feel like I can. There's there's the science fiction author William Gibson, and he made a famous comment at one time, which is the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So maybe, and then the answer to that someone said is, except in Japan, where it's always the future, which I thought was a cute answer. They said this in the 80s, though. So yes, some of this is not innovation in the sense that the technology's been there for a while. Like, we've had QR codes for a while, but every place I went to in 2019 had physical menus. Now it's hard to find a physical menu. It's always a QR code and you bring it up on your phone. And yes, this thing's been around, I think, for decades now, but we're finally using it. Maybe that's the kind of innovation.
But maybe you look at, maybe the second point that I want to bring out would be a bit more relevant. The second point that I want to bring out will be traditional businesses. Whether they are in the retail business where they suffer a lot during this COVID-19 period, or traditional companies like supply chain companies and so forth. A lot of these supply chain companies, for example, or restaurant F&B business, they are also trying to adopt new technology during this period of time, because during the downtime, it is deemed that they have more time to relook at technology adoption. This is from real friends who are running restaurants, and my former clients who is a listed company in Hong Kong, doing supply chain, telling me the same story. They're saying that during this period of time, traditional companies are taking more time to look at technology and to adopt them. And some of them even go to the extent where they decide to shut down their current company and convert it into a more technology one. I give you one example. A company that I own since 2001 is called worldairfare.com. We have always been online, for the last 20 years. But we decided to shut it down end of last year because there's really no one traveling, right? So what we decided to do is to convert this into a more crypto like company, like a Travala or example. And then once the travel opens up, we already have all the different connections and referral business that we have been running for 20 years, and things can restart and reset again. So this will be a transition, a rather smooth transition, although now the company is not running at its optimum right now. But once we get our platform going, once the travel reopen, we will just convert ourselves into a more crypto-based company. So I think transition is going to be smooth, and it's also going to be important because that also give me a chance to tell the rest of the shareholders to say, hey man, it's time to shut it down and let's revamp, So again, thinking from a government standpoint and from a traditional company standpoint, is just a good time to do a revamp. So I think COVID-19 has certainly helped many companies, also change a lot of investors' mindset as well, because it's no longer just, okay, let's just do blockchain and then that's it. It gives you another channel where you could convert traditional, maybe really traditional companies into something that is more tech savvy, and then into something maybe more crypto. So I think it's a very rosy environment right now, for 2021.
There you go. I like it. Yeah, you're right. To a certain extent, there's that other expression, which is you never let a good crisis go to waste.
Someone got to win and someone got to lose, man.
Yeah, I mean, but crisis is an opportunity for change, and people are taking advantage of it. So let me throw this to the panel. I mean, another headline for decades now, but it's sharpening a lot recently, is the rapidly changing geopolitical situation. You're seeing the rise of the East, especially with China, but not just China. You're seeing the relative decline, and maybe more than just relative decline, of the US. I guess opinions can differ. Europe is, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. To what extent is, and I guess this may be controversial, but I feel like going there. To what extent are geopolitical factors driving innovation and the path of innovation? And what's coming to the fore? And maybe I'll throw in there's an element of fracturing of international standards, possibly, or maybe the removal of a hegemon is allowing for a new global standards to arise. So it's a little bit of an open-ended question, but I just want to throw it out there. Hopefully that was reasonably clear. Nisa, do you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, sure. So I think what you're seeing in the East is definitely politically motivated. China being far out ahead of other countries with the DCEP, or the number of patents they've filed in the space, as part of their Belt and Road strategy. I think that the last US administration, with their sanctions and trade talks, really prompted a lot of that. And China really wants to be ahead in a number of different technologies, 5G, AI, blockchain, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, the countries that adopted crypto first were the ones really whose currency had been devalued, or maybe they had a dictatorship, or there was a real need for it. So I think Bitcoin is political and politically motivated, and I think that for a lot of people it's a bastion of freedom, right? Away from regimes that they feel have disappointed them. And in the West, in the US, there are talks about a digital dollar that have been going on for a long time, but definitely are behind the East. And, a lot of that has to do with the politics within the US and the change in administration and a lot of the regulatory landscape, which was very hard for entrepreneurs here, so they have left the US to build elsewhere.
Yep. And unfortunately, I mean, here I am in Kiev for similar reasons. And getting beyond crypto and getting beyond blockchain, are you seeing geopolitics drive certain waves or tangents of innovation generally? I know it's a tough question. I know it's an amorphous question, but it seems relevant to the times.
I'll let somebody else answer that.
Ali, you're smiling. That means
Yeah,
that means I go to you.
I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily fully sort of call it geopolitics, whether or if it's sort of just, you know, government direction and sort of, you know,
We can reframe it that way. Go for it.
But I mean, if you look at like certain sectors, right? Like, you know, education, you know, in Asia is literally one of the hottest sectors in the world, right? Ed tech. And it doesn't necessarily have the same buzz when you sort of go out west, right? And that's just, you know, partly a cultural focus, partly, you know, government also being, you know, talking about sort of the importance of education in a different way. And I think it depends. You can sort of find nuances across the different areas. I mean, of course, AI is sort of hot, I would say, on sort of both ends. And you can sort of break down those sector by sector where there's a lot of interest. Like ag and ag tech has been very, very hot in India. I mean, it's sort of been one of the main things being driven by the government right now. And that doesn't mean it's not hot in other areas, but I would say you don't have that sort of focus from the government in a concentrated manner in other countries, and therefore there is less focus from the rest of the ecosystem. And you can see something similar with the blockchain services network happening in China right now, and how that's sort of bringing a lot of parties together to essentially push and drive blockchain adoption in a very different way. And it's different strategies as well that's almost taken in some ways from the west to the east, right? And you know, you tend to have, I would say, a little bit more oftentimes focus from the government to help drive sort of the private sector in the east, and then out of the west you tend to have it just sort of be more private sector driven, and the government necessarily isn't the forefront, right? I mean, the environment.
Would you say that's true in the EU also? I mean, it seems to be the EU.
I think it depends, but I would say EU sort of in the middle. I mean, the government sort of side does push a lot of initiatives still in Europe, right? But I mean, the environment's a really good sector to look at, right? I mean, in the West, that's driven by the private sector, right? Like fully. I mean, the government's way behind where the private sector is. And if you look at, you know, Asia, I would say it's, and especially China, I would say the government's driven a lot of this, and then sort of encouraging the private sector to get into it and then drive that innovation. So it's not necessarily the government doing everything, but they're driving and helping to make sure it's a focus point for the private sector.
Interesting. And then Richard, Richard, you made the comment about unifying all these different data silos and how that's been a challenge in China, but there's a lot of potential value to be unleashed there. The observation I keep on hearing again and again is when it comes to China and artificial intelligence, just because they have such a huge population, there's such a massive data set available, behaviors and histories and every aspect and permutation of life. Does that just naturally drive an investment advantage there? Or is that sort of a mythological story that doesn't necessarily have legs? What's your perspective?
Yeah, well, actually, this is quite big topic, and there are a lot of different angles to talk about it. So if we talk about it, especially talk about the AI, right? We all know for AI chipset, there are two different kind of chipset. One we call training. For those training chipset, it requires a lot of data. So in China, we do have that kind of advantage, because we do have a lot of data, right? But there's another chip called deducing, and that requires a very good algorithm. And I believe the US have a better technology to have that kind of algorithm. So that's for AI itself. But on top of it, we talk about the semiconductor. So we all know in the past couple of years, right? U.S. government trying to ban the business for Huawei in U.S. and trying to restrict some technology to support Huawei, blah, blah. But actually, it's not just Huawei, including the SMIC, that's the foundry. So If the foundry is not powerful, is not strong enough, is not competitive, then it's not able to produce the competitive product, no matter you have a lot of data or something like that. So it's an ecosystem, I would say. So if we talk about US and China, yes, indeed, China has a good market and they have a right huge market. But in the end, for AI, I don't believe myself. I do know a lot of semiconductor company in China doing the AI chip, but myself don't believe we have a very substantial, advantage over US companies.
Do not.
No, I don't
Yeah,
think so.
I would actually probably counter that in some way. I think the future of AI and the future sort of major advantages at the end of the day is that, AI itself is the commodity, right? So it's going to be very easy for any company sort of anywhere to essentially apply AI and sort of catch up per se on the underlying AI. The problem is the data, and the data is actually where you have the insights, where you can actually go through and sort of capture, analyze, and sort of extract sort of a competitive advantage. And that's essentially the holy grail. Now, the big difference when you look across regions is how they deal with data protections. And China, I think the big advantage is they just have a different philosophy, and they actually tend to look at it more collectively, holistically. The government can help enable access to major companies to that data. Whereas in other areas, I mean, especially Europe, it's very, very difficult to do these things. And then even in North America, it tends to be each company sort of, for the most part, fending for themselves rather than collaborating and sharing that data. And so we personally, I see major advantages on an AI front out of China, primarily just because the way that sort of data protections are evolving and the way that sort of moving right now, and that trend doesn't seem like it'll change.
Yeah, I think that China is big government, so a government always has big power to make things happen or make things not happen. But actually, the regulation here is not mature. I mean, the lawmakers, the regulation is not mature. Okay, that's one thing. And you talk about the AI for commodity, yes. So, for example, a lot of edge computing, right? Edge calculation for IoT device. Every device, they need to have a little AI, little algorithm. However, those algorithm is easier compared to huge computation. So when the product come to be, if we talk about the product need to be competitive, then and down to the chipset itself, because you can get the algorithm from everywhere. Maybe Google can open the source to give you the software algorithm. So for everybody, for those small companies, they can get an algorithm, fairly easier. But the chip, and then the competitors come from the chip itself, the semiconductor. So I would say, yeah, again, that would be very important for that kind of technology.
Andy, can you jump in? I know you have a wide-ranging interest in a ton of topics. What's your take on AI and sort of the East-West interplay?
I think I do agree with Richard to a huge extent in terms of the semiconductor chip can make a hell lot of a difference. But if you look at not too technical, in terms of what AI can actually do and what is needed and so forth. I think collectively, in China, a lot of laws may not be that mature, or they may not have thought through in a very deep manner. But whatever law that they push out would, to me at least, felt that it is something that is safer. They do not want to take on a very cowboy approach on a lot of these things that are in the market, for example, crypto. So, and also collectively, like what Ali has mentioned, collectively they can make a very strong decision. Let's go and do this. The government, the central government, can do a lot of wonders, as compared to, when we look at countries in the West and so forth. You got to talk to party A, party B, party C, and then the big discussion is like never ending, right? And then worse still, there's still a lobbyist and so forth. So a lot of these things make the whole soup rather strange. You get what I mean? So those are some of the things that are stopping innovation. I think the mindset is stopping innovation, not so much on the geopolitical side of things. It's because some of the government are not mature enough or not maybe forward enough to look at things like cryptocurrency, for example. But if they were to take my advice 2 years ago to adopt blockchain, and then subsequently look at adopting cryptocurrency, for example, it will then become a very smooth process because they have gone through the technology. Maybe they know bits and pieces of it, and they know the main gist of the business, and then it's an easy transition. So I think that would then drive a lot of innovation. So it's not so much of a China-US kind of thing, or vice versa, right? So that's how I really see that. As for AI, I think it has a long way to go. As of now, I think data will still play a very big role. Of course, the chipset as well. But the real adoption, we really got a long way to go. Perhaps crypto can be a lot faster in terms of adoption.
I'm appreciating your points, and I'll comment also as a lawyer who's licensed in California in the U.S. The diversity and lack of consistency in our data protection and privacy laws. Like there is no federal privacy law, basically. It's primarily a state law. And you have California that's recently come out with probably the most stringent quasi GDPR version, in the States. But it's like the money transmitter law in the United States. It's not resolved on a federal level. Like in the United States, you have 49 different states with different money transmitter laws. In the US, you have every state, I think, has, actually, I'm not quite sure about that, but states have their privacy law. You have all these data standards, and you have some federal action, but especially with HIPAA, the healthcare information law. But it's just impossible to figure out. And yes, by the time you're done dealing with all the states and all the lobbyists and all the federal and all the industry bodies, you got gray hair, assuming you still have hair. Meanwhile, in these other countries, yeah, I was sort of teasing myself there. Meanwhile, in these other countries like China, you're right. There's yes, it's huge and monolithic. You can't necessarily get them to move the way you want to move, but when they move, they really move. And I feel maybe this isn't geopolitical, but I feel it's structural at this point. It's just it's hard to get mass action done in the U.S. because of our federal system, and I don't think it's addressable, unfortunately.
True.
Now, the great universities, very innovative scientists, all kinds of native advantages, but to the extent that having a large, unified, accessible data set is a prerequisite, I think to Ali's point, we're at a structural disadvantage. And I don't. Actually, let me. Is there anything that the West can do better? I'll throw that out there, and I'll go around. Ali.
Hey, that's a good question. I mean, I think the big advantage, right? I mean, we invest globally. We've got literally companies across 5 continents, and the big advantage still, I think, to the US, to Canada, to the UK, and a couple other places, is still the talent pools are very, very strong, and I find that sort of in general, and of course the generalization. But in general, I think it's stronger on the startup scene. I think there's still more access to early stage capital in these places, which is a big advantage for startups. I mean, you have in a lot of parts of the world, especially when you start looking at emerging markets, there's still a lot of capital out there, but it tends to be focused on Series B, Series C, Series D. I mean, if the companies aren't getting to those stages, they're not getting that capital, right? So a lot of these companies face pretty big gaps. So you still have more and more concentration moving to developed, Western countries. And this is still, even like from our work in China, I think this is still a challenge in China with very early stage capital. And still a problem in some of the Western countries, depending on what cities you're in or.
I'm sorry, Ali, let me break in there. So just question: to what extent do informal family-like networks fill the gap in that early seed A round that is not necessarily visible, but still present?
Yeah, I think it's one, sort of family networks, but I think two, there's just so many more players, so it's more competitive. You're much more open to not relying on pure trust and family networks, I would say, in the West versus elsewhere, just because there's so many more players that want to be at the table. And there's obviously so little seats at the table that it makes it much more competitive. And I think that's still where early stage capital has a big advantage in the West, and those systems need to be, and that infrastructure needs to be developed further in other countries. And there are a lot of benefits that certain countries do, right? Like, for example, in the UK and Singapore, you can write off taxes for early stage investments, right? You can essentially write off, like, sometimes even 1-to-1, which is an incredible benefit.
Is that basically a credit directly applicable against, not a deduction, but a credit directly against your taxes?
Wow. Essentially, and these are the types of things that I think other countries need to follow as an example to help encourage, angel or seed or Series A stage investing, because there are these gaps in the market, and that's really where you nurture, innovation. I think also what the Nordics do, for example, on having a safety net for entrepreneurs. I mean, safety net across society. But that safety net has actually been proven from research to help drive people to take the chance on being an entrepreneur, because, being an entrepreneur isn't the difference of feeding your family or not. And that's a problem still in a lot of countries. And it probably shouldn't be, right? And so, does that safety net mechanism, whether you call it universal basic income or you call it some other, word, is that an important part of innovation from a government perspective to help drive innovation?
So just on clear, you're saying the Nordics general social safety net facilitates entrepreneurship, or is there a specific safety net for entrepreneurs?
No, it's the general one, but you see it very clearly across, Sweden, for example, and how big of an innovation hub that's become. And there's a lot of research that actually proves that this is very beneficial to innovation.
It's a little bit of a tangent, but how do you respond to sort of the moral hazard argument there, that maybe knowing that the risk is socialized makes people do things that they shouldn't necessarily do?
I mean, it's a very good point, and I'm not, necessarily fully endorsing it. I think there's challenges sort of on both sides, depending on how you look at it. There's overstretching of government and all of these things. But at the end of the day, right, if the government's responsibility is to drive and grow substantial value, I think there's and grow their countries, I think there are certain things that they can do, which one of those is how do you facilitate and drive innovation. The second one is how do you protect your people, which might be, whether that's healthcare or, figuring out how to ensure that your people can actually access these things effectively, I think is important. And then I think education, right? And if you can, as a government, get those three things right consistently, like, you probably have a pretty strong country that's growing, right?
So, got it. Let me throw this to Richard. Richard, let me. It's an interesting role reversal for me to hear this. So, if you're looking at the West from China or a Chinese perspective, and you were tutoring them, the West, on how to do better or where they're falling short, like you were the mentor, and when it comes to innovation and especially investments in innovation, what advice would you give?
Well, I still believe that the either Europe company or US company, they do have a better technology from technology point of view compared to some China's technology company. But again, we in China, we do have more versatile business model. For example, we have a very good big giant, right, internet company, right? All the different mobile apps and trying to in payment, we have a better mobile payment system, for example, and right, some others, right, social apps, and also the e-commerce as well, and some kind of cross-border thing as well. So also the financial supply chain, the things. So I think the advice to those China, for example, the advice to China startup, I would like them to try to expand the business model to other market. For example, there are a lot of China big China enterprise, they starting to approach India market. They bring the social apps, they bring the video streaming live social apps to India. They bring the e-commerce business to India, right? Also, some we have Didi, something like Uber, but we are not just have a Didi. We have something else, some kind of some variation of Didi anyway, some variation of Uber. So I would say, China may have a lower. China may not have the advantage on technology side, but we do have a lot of smart people to think about all the different business model. So I think that's something that we can bring to other markets, say EMEA market.
The versatile model comments interesting. Let me throw this to. I'm going to change the question. I'm going to throw this to Nisa and to Andy. It's interesting. We've been focusing on sort of the West and China, and we just got a little bit of India, but speaking about the global South generally, what do you see in terms of opportunities in innovation and investment there? The places we haven't touched yet, whether it's Africa or South America or the Southeast Asia, or just are there any trends that are separate from the North? I'm including sort of China in the North in a way, but just Nisa, let me throw that at you.
Absolutely. I mean, we invest globally. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Southeast Asia. There's also a lot of innovation happening in Africa. And you see this a lot with smart cities. And I think Akon famously is doing his A-coin with one of the cities in Africa. I think
it's in Dakar, I think.
Oh, it is? Okay.
I think, yes, Senegal, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, well, you're right.
Didn't Jack Dorsey announce he's spending 6 months in Africa at one point? CEO of Twitter and Square. I think that there's a need. Again, it goes back to the countries with the need will innovate, right? And there are really, just looking at like M-Pesa in Africa, the first mobile payments network. It was really because, a lot of people were unbanked and still are unbanked. But people did have cell phones.
So
right?
I'm going to sarcastically ask, doesn't Libra solve that?
You mean DM now?
Oh, yeah, I was wondering what happened with that.
Yeah.
I saw the squigglies and I was like, really? Okay, no, please go on.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Libra phenomenon, right? With I don't know if you watched the hearings in the U.S. a few years ago, but
I'll one up you on that. Not only did I see the hearings, but I spent a good 3 months lecturing on this, and I crashed Libra's headquarters in Geneva in person.
Wow.
Took photos, and Libra's not there. It was just PayPal. So I found I looked them up in the corporate registry. I went there, I walked in there, I lied. I told them I wanted to tour the co-working space. I saw it all, and it was like 5 guys, and they were guys working for PayPal. I'm like, this is not going to happen.
Wow.
So check my Facebook.
That must have been before PayPal left the Libra organization.
It was right before. Yeah, it was before the whole coalition fell apart, and yeah, that was fun times. But anyways, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, Libra was really like the starting gun for so many central banks to explore CBDCs and kind of panic.
It forced their hand, and maybe that's a good thing.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, and then they had to eliminate the whole basket concept. They ended up making it more like a one-to-one stable coin. Maybe it had the dollar and the euro, but yeah, I mean, I think does DM solve that? That's what they said that they were doing it for, right?
That's what they said.
I haven't seen really any product come out of DM. I know there are people still working there, so I'm still waiting, but. Hopefully they will develop something or some solution. But
it's gonna be too late.
In 10 years' time, I guess. In 10 years' time.
Andy, let me throw it to you. So moving out of the sort of West China zone and looking more towards Africa and Southeast Asia and Latin America, are you seeing Is there anything noticeable that you're picking up on? Any kind of contrary trend? Any unique challenge of innovation?
I think every one of us are neglecting ASEAN, which is Southeast Asia, the 10 countries. Because the 10 countries add up together, I think they would have about 700 million of people. And I'm not sure how many trillion of dollars in terms of GDP within that 10 countries. But if you look at it from my perspective in Singapore, I do see that the whole Southeast Asia is being neglected in a certain way because that market itself, if you look at it collectively as a block, it is actually a very, very big piece of, well, I see a lot of dollar signs on top of the map, when I look at ASEAN. So I think innovations should try to find its way into the ASEAN market. They should also think about a few things. One is the 10 of them should try to work collectively, but I guess it's a bit tough. But they should also look at how China is trying to, trying to do things. A lot of my Chinese friends are more action people. You should try to get some of this Chinese mentality within this ASEAN region. Get some Chinese with the action mentality, and then you get some people from the West where sorry to say, they talk, like good concepts like VM, talk and talk and talk. You need all these two elements to add together to really look into the whole ASEAN region. Because if you look at it just from population standpoint, I know many of these countries like Vietnam and Philippines, they are all ready to adopt cryptocurrency in their own manner. So if we want a good adoption, if we want more people to know what we are doing, that's a big pool of people that we can convert them. So I think Southeast Asia would be a place to do more testing, and also it's also relatively cheaper to run in some of the Southeast Asia countries, like Vietnam or even Philippines, as compared to Singapore, right? So they have a big population and so forth. We should find some ways to tap into that market and create some big wave. You can create the next Grab, next TT, or you can create a lot of things from that space.
Yeah, I was in.
I
Sorry,
wanted to just touch on a quick example, but go ahead.
Just super fast. I was in Vietnam last year for a friend's wedding, and he's in DeFi, and it was my first time going there to Ho Chi Minh City, or ex Saigon, and just looking at the traffic and the Mekong River and everyone else, it felt like anarcho-capitalism. Like, I think people get the wrong idea about some of these countries. I mean, they're sure their government may or may not be permissive, but they're kind of permissive on a certain plane, and there's a huge entrepreneurial groundswell going on in all these countries. I mean, even maybe politically in Myanmar, but it's just, yeah, there's a lot of vibrancy and a lot of energy. But Andy, I think you're commenting about an action mentality is well taken. I'm not entirely sure it's lacking. When I saw the traffic in Vietnam and the commerce on the Mekong and everything else going on, I don't know, maybe it's action to like take things to the next level and be innovative and push things through.
There's a lot of business. There's actually a lot of business to be made. I mean, if you look at Thailand itself, 10 years ago, they used to be a big country, before the economic crisis and so forth. So if you look at Thailand itself, self-sustaining, they can do a lot of things. As long as you enter that market, you could do wonders. And you talk about traffic. If you go to Indonesia, Jakarta, and so forth, the traffic is, well, horrendous, right? But if you look at it from another standpoint, I go Indonesia, I take helicopter, right? I can travel from point A to point B.
Oh my God, Andy just totally did a flex on us. So when he goes there, he takes the helicopter. Okay.
But it's a way, it's the mentality that people has, so we got to change that, we got to change that.
I like it. Ali, I think we're gonna give you the last word because we're coming up on the hour, so make it a good one.
I mean, I just wanted to quickly touch on, the difference in sort of innovation in the different regions, right? But you look at, regulation, say in Nigeria recently, central bank came out sort of against Bitcoin, but you haven't seen it slow down. You've seen it accelerate, right? And you've got fintech, borrowing, lendings, and savings products that are making huge sort of strides, I think, within the African continent right now. You look at Latin America, and innovation in ag is not going to come from the US necessarily, because it's not an ag driven in the same way, right? So we've got, in emerging markets, you've got 50% of GDP driven by the ag sector, and you've got 2% of capital being lent to that sector, to these smallholder farming families. And so huge discrepancy, right? And so we've even got a portfolio company called Agrio, really working to solve a lot of these problems, leveraging blockchain, AI, satellite imagery, geospatial mapping. And, and it's these types of things that are coming from emerging markets to solve emerging market problems that are really worth keeping an eye on. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're on the hour. I just want to thank you all. It was a stimulating, interesting discussion. You all gave some really interesting perspectives, and thank you. And I salute you. And now we all get to log off. So Digital Week
Yes, I
Online.
get to sleep now. I get to sleep now, man.
Andy, you're a trooper. I love you.